So welcome to another What Was In It with the Keyboard Magazine. And today we're taking a look at Keyboard Magazine, issue March 1996. And as you can see, the main feature of this issue is the X-Files. Now, X-Files was really the most, or one of the most popular TV shows there was, and everyone watched this. It was groundbreaking in so many ways, and one of the ways in which it was groundbreaking was with its music score, the soundtrack. And I remember this issue very well when it came out. And in the issues that came after this, Keyboard Magazine got a lot of heat over the front cover here. It would seem that using the main characters, the actors of the TV series, smashed up on the front cover here wasn't really what they were supposed to do, according to some people. The consensus was that the show's composer, Mark Snow, his face should be the one all over the front cover, not the actors of the show or the characters of the show. Dana Scully and Fox Mulder, these two people here. So, well, I think it was the right call to use the actors, the main characters of the show, because it sort of drew people in the newsstands, I guess, when buying magazines. So from a commercial, financial standpoint, I think this was the right decision by Keyboard Magazine at the time. And again, X-Files was really a groundbreaking series in many ways, and I'll take you through everything in the magazine, and we'll shortly get to the X-Files main feature of this issue. Usually I do 80s issues of Keyboard Magazine, but occasionally it's fun to dive into the 90s. And 1996, well, I did a lot of music in the 90s, so and I used a lot of gear as well, so let's see what we can find. And if you've watched my videos going through Keyboard Magazine issues before, you know that Korg often bought ads in the first couple of pages of Keyboard Magazine. And in this issue, they have one page only at the beginning with the Quark Trinity. Now, I had the Quark Trinity. I bought it brand new, late 1995, I think. And I toured with it a lot. I gigged with it. I was in a band at the time, and I used the Quark Trinity and the Roland JX10, I think, and some modules as well, Akai samplers, among other things. But the Quark Trinity was really awesome when it came out. You had a touch screen and a lot of very cool sounds, very usable sounds, as Korg always had. And I had the Quark Trinity Plus, which is featured here, which had the Korg Prophecy board installed as well. So you got a sort of mono synth on top of everything else that could do, again, groundbreaking sounds at the time. The Korg Prophecy is a synth of its own. And this was built into the Korg Trinity Plus. Very cool. Lots of good memories of the Korg Trinity Plus. And again, if you've seen my videos with the back issues of Keyboard Magazine before from the 80s, you can see now, if you compare, that the layout of the magazine has changed quite a bit actually since the mid 80s. And I always liked the old layout better. No surprises there, but it's okay, I guess. And here we have it, the Korg Prophecy, and like I told you, a mono instrument, mono synth, and it had a ribbon controller, which was pretty new at the time. Something also the Korg Trinity featured. And I never had the Prophecy in itself, that keyboard, but I had the sounds in the Trinity, and I really like the Korg Prophecy sounds. I think they still sound not groundbreaking, but they sound original and quite unique. Editor's page, and you have a lot of ads, of course. That's one of the things I really like about these old magazines, looking through the ads. And often when you find scanned versions of gear tech magazines from the 80s and 90s online, they've almost always omitted the ad pages But I think the ad pages is really the time machine here. So I really like old ads. Sweetwater was running, of course, in 1996. I think by 1996 and onwards, more and more letters were coming in through email and internet connection, online connections. Up until this time, it was, I guess, written letters, handwritten letters, or type machines, etc. Opcode, Studio Vision, or Vision, Windows, as they call it here. A Samson graphic equalizer. Sample CDs were, of course, a big thing in the mid-90s. Spectrasonics were starting to rise back then, always chock full of quality in their sounds, of course. I have some of these. I bought some of these in the mid-90s. Worldview, different small features about artists, gear, etc. Mostly artists, persons. Peter Schwartz gigged with David Bowie in the mid-90s, together with Mike Garson, which was really the main keyboard associate of David Bowie, both in the studio and live at the time. I really like the way that David Bowie approached Peter Schwartz for working with him. Schwartz says, "I got a call from David one day saying, in English accent, 'Hello, Peter, this is David Bowie. Would you like to work with me?'" Excuse my bad English accent here, but I really like the way he is describing the phone call from David Bowie wanted to work with him, or asking him if he wanted to work with David Bowie. He's using some interesting gear here. The Roland D550 and JD990, not so much, but he's revealing a secret weapon here. He says, or it says, Schwartz's secret weapon for piano sounds is a Yamaha TX1P. It's one of my favorite piano modules, he confides. It's a sleeper. Nobody I know seems to use it, but it's got a very strong sound. Interesting. I've never actually read anyone hailing the TX1P as something special, but he does. Maybe I should look into it a bit more. Kansas. Again, sampling CDs, very big in the mid-90s. And here's some new gear coming up. Interface, a lot of new sections in Keyboard Magazine issues at this time. In the mid-90s, the PCMCIA cards were a big thing. That died out pretty quick. Sort of cards, credit card sized sound cards or ROM cards, MIDI general standard cards, etc. for laptops. The PCM90 was new at the time. The George Bush alternate controller, what's this? The Dimension Beam from Interactive Light is a MIDI controller that generates MIDI information based on a player's position within the device's cone of infrared light. Did anyone use this? Sounds kind of cool. Never saw it, never used it, only read about it. If you've used it or have it, please say so in the comment section. I'd love to hear your experience with it. Portable DAT machine. DAT was very big in the mid-90s, of course. The Akai S2000. I had that as well. Can't say I liked it very much due to the small screen at the time. Very cumbersome to use only with this. But you had the MESA, the MESA software, which made it a lot easier and faster to set up samples, programs, key groups, etc. On its own, it was kind of slow to work on. I know because I used it a lot. I used it live. And here's the main article, of course, the main feature, a very comprehensive feature. Up until this point, I think it was one of the most comprehensive I've seen so far in any keyboard magazine issue. And this is, of course, Mark Snow from X-Files, A Day in the Life of the X-Files Mark Snow. And I read this from cover to cover many times back then. I really dig the show, I dig the music, and it was so cool to read about every aspect of the show in terms of the music. You have to remember, in 1996, very few of us, at least in Norway, had any sort of internet connection. I did, but it was in the very beginning of its breakthrough. So all the information we got was really from magazines like this. So what I really liked here was that the journalist was invited to the meeting an early morning where Mark Snow had to fire up the different musical cues for the show's producers, executive producers, etc., and have his music approved by those people to move forward with this week's episode. And I'm just going to take you through a little bit of that meeting in this video here. So it says 5 of the X-Files top brass have joined Mark Snow at his home studio to evaluate this week's score. And among them is, of course, Chris Carter, the drive behind the series, the show. So it's Monday, 8:30 a.m., and they meet up, etc. at 9 o'clock. The scene shifts to the backyard studio, and chit-chat subsides as Snow, seated at his synclavier and Macintosh, fires up the first cue. A powerful scene, a mass humanoid execution, and the music is equally powerful. And they all watch bug-eyed. At 9:04, cue ends. The consensus is spectacular, but Carter has reservations about the overall mood. And they talk about that, and Snow has to take notes because he knows this means he has to do some changes. At 9:13, the next cue plays, and blah, 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 blah. And I read further, unlike typical TV music that stops and starts from scene to scene, Snow's music often flows through the scene changes, and this cue is no exception. At the end, Carter nods to Snow. Snow nods back. Translation, 2 nods equal job well done. Next. So this is very cool. He gets a nod from Carter, he nods back, and that's the end of that cue. Everyone's satisfied. Very interesting and very cool to read that this was what was going on. And so it goes on. They or Mark Snow plays through different cues, and some has to be redone, some is fine as it is. The sound supervisor says, this show has so much music in it. A typical show has an average of 12 minutes of music for a 1-hour show or 24 minutes for a 2-hour movie. The X-Files average 38 minutes for a 1-hour show. So there was a lot of music to be made. And here is Mark Snow's rig at the time. You can see the synclavier, he has a Macintosh, and he has a rack of synths, samplers, etc., and the mixing desk. And we have it here as well. The Roland S760, a CD-ROM drive, Furman PL8, Kurzweil micropiano, a JL Cooper Nexus MIDI merger. He has a Korg Wavestation SR, EMU Morpheus, Proteus 1 and 2 and 3, and a Fostex 400 time code generator reader, patch bay, etc., and VCRs, etc., etc. Right, nice. I think I'll go through the sounds in that iconic X-Files theme later as well. So let's see that. And a Roland ad for the VS880. I had this as well. I did actually a lot of recording, CDs, etc. for clients on the Roland VS880. Very nice. It has sort of a compressed sound if you used all the 8 tracks at the same time or recorded on all the 8 tracks. But you could get a less compressed sound by using lesser tracks. Very fast, very efficient to use. I did a ton of work on this. I really loved it. I sold it eventually, but this brings back memories. I can tell you. Again. I remember this episode which they're going through in the X-Files. It's a very nice article here. And Mark Snow also did the series Heart to Heart, if you remember that. It's sort of thriller detective series in the 80s. And another thing that's also a focus here is that with X-Files, and that was where it broke new grounds as well, the music could go on for minutes at a time, very abstract music, free of meter and just evolving through the scenes in a sort of natural way. And that was very new at the time and something I really paid attention to. Although I didn't do any kind of music like that myself, I really appreciated it in the series. So let's see what else. And here's the da-da-da-da. That's the X-Files theme, that flute or whistle sound. Let's see what we can find out. And they're asking him what makes the sound, which was the melody. Mark Snow says, I tried on various instruments, violins, flutes, woodwinds, brass, voices, and combination of all those things. But they seemed too ordinary, so I tried some ethnic instruments, too much, too busy, not distinctive enough. So on my EMU Proteus 2, there was this whistle. I thought, nah, that's too silly. But okay, I tried, and I started fiddling around with it, and this started to happen. And basically, the theme. Cool. So, if you're wondering what sound module he used to make that iconic X-Files theme melody, it was the EMU Proteus 2. That's it. He says it himself. Yeah, it's a long article and feature. Very interesting. And I have a scanner now, so, well, the Sony HRMP5 looks like a stereo deck for your car. Actually, a very cool and good quality effects processor. Really like this. I should get one back, actually. Ensoniq again. This had to be somewhat towards the end of Ensoniq at the time. You see the ASR here and the ASR 88. The module as well. X-Files again. And you remember from that meeting in the beginning of the article with X-Files where the executive sits down with Mark Snow and he has to fire up those cues for this episode. It's closing off here by asking Chris Carter, based on today's meeting, Mark was asked to touch up only 2 cues, correct? And he says, right, there were 2 areas that didn't pass with an A+. They passed with an A, but not an A+, and we're an A+ show. So he says Mark will fix it up fast, and Keyboard Magazine journalist concludes with, and indeed he did. We watched Snow attack those cues and ultimately deliver new versions in under 15 minutes. The end result of Snow and company's magic can be appreciated each Friday night at 9 p.m. on the Fox network. So he worked fast, it would seem. They're all an XP10. I never had that, but I know it pretty well. Regardless, Cakewalk Pro Audio. In 1996, more and more DAWs had lots of audio tracks as well. I got into the DAW audio part when I got Cubase Audio, which had, I think, 4 tracks of audio alongside sequenced MIDI tracks. But in 1996, more and more digital audio workstations had audio tracks, of course. I'll just skip through this part. It's hard to talk too much about sheet music in a video like this, where the focus is more overall on gear, people, and ads. You remember these? The sound expansion modules from Roland. Pro Tools, of course, were up and coming in a big way in the 90s. And Richard Einhorn, not very familiar with his work. Mackie, of course, did a lot of stuff in the 90s. I don't think you hear that much from Mackie these days. Don't know what they're up to, really. I don't pay attention to what they're doing anymore in any big way. PV. The Rentals, anyone remember those? Or anyone remember them? They toured with, I think it's saying here, 3 of the 6 Rentals is the name of the group, actually play keyboards on stage, and not just any keyboards, old, cool, funky ones. In 1996, they referred to these as old, cool, funky ones. The Moog Source, ARP Omnis, and they used them, pumped them through different amps, etc., the Orange Custom and Polytone amps, etc. Again, not a group I listened a lot to, the Rentals. Mackie again. I still have one of these CR mixers, although these are a little newer at the time. I'll pull out that old CR mixer one day and show you. SoundForge is something I used. I think I still have it on floppy somewhere. Hot tips on the Digitech Studio Vocalist. I had the earlier one, the sort of desktop version of this. And I used it live as well to harmonize my voice, both live and in the studio. The Alesis QS6. I had that as well. I've had so many things. I never really liked it. Don't know what it was, but I never really took to it. Behringer, up and coming in the mid-90s. Tascam mixer. Keyboard Reports, where they review sample CDs, etc., giving them a score and, yeah, talking about them. Again, with no internet, this was really how we could get a sort of sense of if a sample CD was something we might be interested in. So these reviews of sample CDs was really valuable to people like myself. Digitech again. The E64 sampler from EMU. The EMU Darwin, a 8-track hardware audio recorder. Again, not everyone was impressed by doing audio recordings in the computer as such. It was pretty new at the time, so a lot of people stuck to the old format of something looking like or working like a analog multitrack tape recorder. And so the 8-track hard disk recorder or hard disk recording on a hardware module like this was something that most of the high-end companies were still making at the time. And EMU Darwin, well, that was a module recorder that was popular for a brief span of time. They soon became pretty much extinct by the rise of the DAW, the software in the PC or Mac. Korg again. Fatar master keyboard, keyboard controller, music and computers, the magazine for desktop music. So the term desktop music was starting to creep in even back in 1996. Power Tracks Pro. Anyone remember that? This was actually very popular, especially in Europe, I can remember. Netscape Navigator, and how browsing the web would look in 1996. It looks very dated now, but I love it. I love the layout, the way Netscape Navigator looked and looks now. A whole different era. And the Fatar Studio 1176 keyboard controller. Songs Made Famous by Whitney Houston, Volume 1, standard MIDI files. A big thing back in the day. A lot of gigging musicians with Korg 01s, etc. used standard MIDI files to both play and record their own tracks, sequence tracks, to use in live gigs like dance music at the time, and especially here in Europe where people went out to dance. A lot of gigging musicians, one-man bands, used standard MIDI files to play the hits at the time. The Emulator 4 keyboard. This is interesting, the Technics SX-WSA1 workstation synthesizer. In the mid-80s, workstations were very popular. I never had this myself. I did play it a couple of times. I never had the chance to dig deep into it. So I don't know very much about it actually, except that it sounded, some of the sounds and the way you approach sounds, made sounds, were quite unique. So this is on my bucket list of things I'd like to dig into if I ever get the chance. If you have experience with it, have it, used it, please give us your opinions in the comment section. Again, software and CD sample libraries, etc. I don't know if you can see this, but here is the Studio Electronics ATC1. This is much more famous, I guess, the SE1, but the ATC1 right here, it both looks unique and this is really a awesome synth. I really should get my hands on one of these one day as well. Release your own CDs. Digitech again. Reviews of either books or recordings. And as usual, there are more and more ads, black and white ads at the end of Keyboard Magazine. The Fostex hard disk recorder. It came in a module as well, and I had that module. Used this for a lot of recordings and releases. The module, that is, not the desktop version. And CD-ROMs was, of course, like I told you, CD-ROMs were very popular in the mid-90s. It was the way to store a lot of information and read a lot of information on CDs. I bet some of you remember Encarta on Windows, the encyclopedia. Steinberg. And some minor clinics at the end here with tips and tricks, etc. Composing. The Alesis DM5 drum module. Craig Anderton always had very accurate, professional, and useful features in Keyboard Magazine and other magazines as well. This time it was digital to digital transfers, as more and more audio at this time had to be transferred, and now it was time to transfer them from a digital format to another digital format, or to another, from one digital platform to another, etc. And that could result in problems because of sample rate conversions and things like that, dithering. A question section. Dave Stewart was always a very popular guy for writing small clinics or features. BBE had some maximizers, etc., sonic maximizers. And here we have those smaller ads for different stuff, everything from gear to software, etc. The Fat Attack, Waldorf, the Waldorf Pulse, instruments, the Roland D50 629 used, the Juno 2 375. At this point, some analog synths had starting to creep up in price. It was still a somewhat golden age of picking up these instruments. Unfortunately, I sold most of mine, like so many others, so I definitely didn't pay attention to what the future had in store. Again, like so many other people as well. Akai VX90 350. That is junky music. And we're slowly coming towards the end here. You could order keyboard back issues available. That's not the case now, I think. This ad run in a lot of issues, I remember, teaching you to get perfect pitch. Can you really train that, or are you born with perfect pitch? I don't know. Up for debate. You can take your playing to the next level. And this is the last ad. Yeah, one of the last ads. Kurzweil K2500X. This was heavy. That's all I can say. This was extremely heavy. I gigged with this as well. And you felt like you were getting a hernia every time you had to carry this on and off stage, I can assure you. And the last ad. And that pretty much wraps it up for today's episode. X-Files, I highly recommend this issue of March 1996 to get a really close, in-depth look at what it took to make the score for X-Files and the interviews with all the different executives for different aspects of the show. Highly interesting and highly recommended reading. As always, I'm Espen Kraft. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Cheers.